Hey class, welcome back to EDUC 3233. We are continuing on our discussion of motivation. Our last lecture, we looked at self-determination theory. We're going to continue that, but we're going to look at some variations now in extrinsic motivation. So kind of a deep dive on self-determination. So think about these following scenarios. You can even pause the video if you'd like to, really think about them and ponder them. But consider these scenarios: a task that you enjoyed doing for its own sake, a task you did because you wanted to avoid being punished, and a task you did because you believed it was important to becoming the person you want to be. So think about kind of the differences and levels of motivation there. There is motivation in all elements. The motivation to just simply do to enjoy for its own sake, the motivation to avoid punishment, the motivation to become your future self, which I imagine, a lot of you taking this class, that's kind of what you imagine, as you take college courses, you're kind of keeping your future self in mind. And to some extent, maybe you might even feel that way about, learning for its own sake of learning. Hopefully by now in college isn't so much about avoiding punishment. I hope that's not the case for all of you, but you never know. But self-determination theory is what helps us to kind of explain these variations. Like even though we know there's motivation, but that motivation looks different, so it kind of gives us a framework of how to understand the variation. So when we look at extrinsic motivation, really when we look at the motivation as a whole, we can think of it as a continuum, and this comes directly from Ryan and DC's self-determination theory. But the idea is we start off kind of on one side, with no motivation, which I don't really love the idea of saying there's no motivation. Like if there was no motivation whatsoever, like we just wouldn't get out of bed and wouldn't care, we wouldn't take care of ourselves. So we do really need some motivation to an extent, but typically when somebody has started, so we kind of start off when we have even an initial motivation, it starts off more of external regulation. Kind of all of this is under the umbrella of extrinsic, meaning the motivation is coming from outside of us. So really at this earliest stage, it's all about compliance. Like I'm just doing this so I don't get in trouble, or maybe I'm doing it to earn some kind of reward or avoid some kind of punishment. Then we start to see what more of an introjected regulation. This is where it's still external, but it's starting to become a little less external. There might be elements of self-control involved, ego involvement. Again, the focus on rewards and punishments, but now it might be more internalized. Like you're kind of it's not someone else's standard, maybe it's your own standard. So it's like, okay, if I don't do well in this exam, I might, hold myself accountable by not watching TV tonight. I might just go home and read and study instead, kind of self-punishment. But if I do well, maybe I'll, go take myself out to dinner and have a nice meal to reward myself, kind of thing. Identified regulation, it's becoming more internal based somewhat. It's kind of on that bridge of internal versus external. You're starting to adopt more personal values. You're understanding the importance, not just because somebody says to do it, but because, hey, I actually understand why this is important. And then we get into that integrated regulation where it's more internal, where it's more congruent with your own values. You're developing a sense of awareness, and it's becoming more, the behavior is becoming more in line with your own sense of self. And then ideally we get to something that's a state of intrinsic motivation where the regulation, where the motivation to behave is regulated internally, and it comes down to just pure interest and enjoyment or some kind of inherent satisfaction with the activity versus somebody trying to make you do that activity. So I just kind of went through that whole paradigm. Yeah, I know the next few slides are just kind of, yeah, outlining all of that. So really, it's just when we get students that come into the classroom, a lot of times they may have no motivation for a particular topic. Like, for example, I teach statistics, and maybe when students first come into the classroom, they don't have a whole lot of motivation for statistics, only simply it's to complete their graduation requirements or it's part of their degree program or something along those lines. But hopefully, through instruction, you can kind of help students move along this continuum to where maybe it's at first it's very much external regulation to maybe they're starting to identify and they're starting to internalize some of those behaviors. So, anyways, although intrinsic motivation can be ideal in education, it's often impractical. Like it's great if you want students to be intrinsically motivated and you can get them there. But more often than not, you should be really happy as an educator if you get students that start off that are a motivated and you can get them to move anywhere on this continuum. I think is a good thing, is you're getting to move towards intrinsic motivation. It's ideal, but not always practical. Identified and integrated regulation share many of the same positive aspects of intrinsic motivation. It's kind of like intrinsic light, so to speak. So as educators, the takeaway is we could focus not only on promoting intrinsic motivation, but identified and integrated regulation in students. So that's another way of just kind of thinking about and conceptualizing extrinsic motivation. We're going to stop for here and we'll pick up on our next section, a new section next week. All right, take care, everyone. Bye.